Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a cup of Jonah. So today, we embark for the first time into the questions about God within this work we've been working through here. As you remember, excuse me, a little bit of a cough this morning. But as you remember, we've been working through all the preambles to the discussion. The book is called God, right? So the first 9 days and chapters have all been preparing for the discourse that we're about to set out on. So here we go. Chapter 10. The opinion of those who say that the existence of God, being self-evident, cannot be demonstrated. There are some persons to whom the inquiry seeking to demonstrate that God exists may perhaps appear superfluous. These are the persons who assert that the existence of God is self-evident, in such wise that its contrary cannot be entertained in the mind. It thus appears that the existence of God cannot be demonstrated, as may be seen from the following arguments. So it's interesting, he's kind of playing the devil's advocate in the sense that he's kind of arguing against the point that he'll ultimately make. These propositions are said to be self-evident that are known immediately upon the knowledge of their terms. Thus, as soon you know the nature of a whole and the nature of a part, you know immediately that every whole is greater than its part. Good morning, Infinite. The proposition God exists is of this sort. For by the name God, we understand something than which a greater cannot be thought. This notion is formed in the intellect by one who hears and understands the name God. As a result, God must exist already, at least in the intellect. But he cannot exist solely in the intellect, since that which exists both in the intellect and in reality is greater than that which exists in the intellect alone. Now, as the very definition of the name points out, nothing can be greater than God. Consequently, the proposition that God exists is self-evident, as being evident from the very meaning of the name God. So it's interesting, I'm going to pause for a second. What's interesting here is one of the definitions of the most basic definition of the word God is that which nothing greater can be thought, of which nothing greater can be thought, right? So the most, it's like all the different religions with all the different perspective on who God is or the different attributes of God, all of them agree that whatever that highest thing is that created everything else, that we can't think of anything greater than it, that's what we're giving the name God to, right? So it's a very, very limited claim. But he's saying that once you understand what's meant by the term, you also understand that it can't just exist in the mind, this idea that we have, because things that exist both in the mind and in reality are greater than what just exists in the mind. So there you go. Now, you've just that which of which nothing greater can be thought in the mind. I just thought of something greater if it actually exists in reality. Therefore, now that's actually the thing that fits the definition of that which nothing greater can be thought, right? Okay. Again, it is possible to think that something exists whose non-existence cannot be thought. Clearly, such a being is greater than the being whose non-existence can be thought. Consequently, if God himself could be thought not to be, then something greater than God could be thought. This, however, is contrary to the definition of the name God. Hence, the proposition that God exists is self-evident. Furthermore, Those propositions ought to be the most evident in which the same thing is predicated of itself, for example, man is man, or whose predicates are included in the definition of their subjects. For example, man is an animal. Now he's using the term predicate in the sense that Aristotle used it. Predicate is comes from the word to predicere, so to speak on something. So it's just a basically way of saying calling or naming something. When we speak something about, so when we say man is man, is his example. So we're predicating or speaking the name man of the thing man. So he makes a little division. He says, I'm going to read that first sentence again with the understanding of what he means exactly by the word predicate. Furthermore, those propositions ought to be the most evident in which the same thing is predicated of itself. For example, man is man, or whose predicates are included in the definition of their subjects. For example, man is an animal. Now, in God, as will be shown in a later chapter, it is preeminently the case that his being is his essence, so that to the question, what is he? And to the question, is he? The answer is one and the same. Thus, in the proposition God exists, the predicate is consequently either identical with the subject, or at least included in the definition of the subject. Hence, that God exists is self-evident. What is naturally known is known through itself. For we do not come to such propositions through an effort of inquiry, but the proposition that God exists is naturally known, since, as will be shown later on, the desire of man naturally tends towards God as towards the ultimate end. The proposition that God exists is, therefore, self-evident. There is also the consideration that through which all the rest are known ought itself to be self-evident. Now God is of this sort. For just as the light of the sun is the principle of all visible perception, so the divine light is the principle of all intelligible knowledge, since the divine light is that in which the intelligible illumination is found first and in its highest degree. That God exists, therefore, must be self-evident. These, then, and others like them, are the arguments by which some think that the proposition God exists is so self-evident that its contrary cannot be entertained by the mind. It's interesting to reflect on how different the times we live in. Because here, back in the day, so to speak, he's saying that, some, he says literally some, think, see that the existence of God is self-evident, and you cannot possibly even entertain the idea that God doesn't exist. But we live in a world today where there are a great many people who entertain the idea that God exists. So even just from our own experience, we can see that these arguments are not true. But what is interesting, so he says, so there's a really beautiful thing about like scholastic, they call it the scholastic method. So this is the medieval intellectual exercise, right? Where it was almost like debate class, right? Where they would be like, it would seem that what we're discussing today is false. That God exists, one of the questions, right, in the Summa. Because the Summa Theologica, which I had talked about as one of Aristotle's primary works, right, is each of the questions are divided into subsidiary articles. So for example, on the question of the existence of God, question 2 in book 1 of the Summa Theologica, it asks the question of, so the question is on the existence of God. And it's divided into 3 articles. So the 3 articles are very similar to what we see here. One is whether the proposition God exists is self-evident. 2, whether it is demonstrable. Can you prove it? And then 3, ask the question directly, does God exist? Whether God exists. But the scholastic method is, he starts every article, it's so wonderful. He says, whether the existence of God is self-evident. Objection 1. It would seem that the existence of God is self-evident. And then he gives an argument. And he says, objection 2. Further, those things are said to be self-evident, which, ... Objection. And then he gives an argument. And then he says, objection 3. So he gives all these different objections to the position that later then he says, in the corpus of each article, the main body of each article, he says, I answer that. A thing can be self-evident in either of 2 ways, right? So he first sets out in every single article throughout this entire book, and there's, if memory serves, 2,600 plus articles. So of all the questions he asks, of all the different chapters, so to speak, there's these different subchapters, you could call them, called articles, where he asks a single question and he toastmasters it, so to speak. First, he argues with the best arguments he can against the position he's going to take and try to demonstrate. And then he'll give the reason for his position. Then he'll respond. Oh, thank you for that. I'm just probably sitting back a little too far from the mic. Thanks for letting me know, Infinite. Is this a little better? Let me see if I can turn the music down a little bit. So yeah, let me know if you guys are also having trouble hearing me. Okay, technical difficulties. Please hold. Okay, hopefully that's better. Let me know, Infinite. Okay, so here's the wonderful thing here is, so this scholastic method is very Toastmaster-esque, right? So like debate class, what you do is you basically, the topic is decided, pro or con this issue, this or that issue. And then no matter what your personal opinion is, you have to argue for the other side, right? So this is what he does, and this is the scholastic method. They would always argue the contrary, and then after he gives his corpus, he gives his responses to the arguments, right? So very beautiful, very intellectually stimulating. And what's funny is a familiarity with the Summa and the objections that he gives. Oftentimes when someone in conversation with someone that disagrees with one of the premises that he's arguing in conversation throughout all of history since him, oftentimes he's presented a stronger argument for their position against what the truth is, if so to speak, than the people arguing today. So it's kind of interesting because oftentimes you can be like, well, let me add to your argument before I respond to it. So it's kind of interesting. But so he's essentially, it's good to ponder here, right? So he's essentially examining whether or not, so today's a little bit more of a simple reflection on the arguments of people that say, not only does he exist, but it's so self-evident it's not even worth arguing or talking about or trying to prove, because it just is. And there's obviously some weight to that, because as we talked about yesterday, so many people, like in every culture around the world, everybody instinctively, their heart is drawn to a creator of some kind, that it would seem that his existence is self-evident. So it'll be interesting. On Monday, we'll actually move from asking, okay, well, since we know now that we've heard the arguments about whether or not God's existence is self-evident, on Monday, the chapter heading is a refutation of the above mentioned opinion and a solution to the arguments. So ponder this weekend the ideas presented about God being the idea of God, the notion of God being so self-evident that you can't really even entertain the contrary, and that we can't think of anything greater than God, therefore it's evident, right? So it'll be interesting. But on Monday is when we'll dig into that. Now, looking ahead a little bit, chapter 12, he's going to say, again, he's going to bring up another objection of them saying that now he goes to the other side. So on the one side, he says today, well, some say that it's so obvious it can't be demonstrated. Others say, it doesn't need demonstration, it's so obvious. The other side, on Tuesday, he'll say, well, others say that we can't actually demonstrate it. It has to be held by faith alone. It's because it's above reason. And so that's another set of objections. You see, so he's kind of like saying, okay, well, we could. Some say, let's address some who say it doesn't need demonstration, and then the other side is it can't be demonstrated. It has to be held by faith alone. And obviously, then the implication is that then he's going to lay out the reasons why he believes, he understands that it can be demonstrated from reason. And then towards the end of next week, I'm going to have to think about what to do. We're going to have to break up, I think, the subsequent chapter where he actually sets out to demonstrate that God exists. That's going to be a beautiful chapter, but it's like the chapters now that we've been reading are 1 to 2 pages. And towards the end of next week, when we hit that question about the existence of God, it's like 10 or 12 pages. It's one of the longest chapters that we'll encounter here, at least in this whole first section. So I think we're going to have to break that one up, but I'll let you guys know as we get closer. But it's interesting. It's interesting to kind of see how he's doing before he actually addresses the question of whether God exists directly. He's like, okay, let's see what people are saying. Let's take a survey, so to speak, and then let's address each of those opinions that would claim otherwise, or that would claim that it's not a necessary thing to consider. So, all right, well, it's a little bit shorter today than usual, but I think it'll be interesting to see this. We can see this scholastic method of this intellectual exercise of kind of arguing both ways before pushing on ahead to, or considering the arguments against, so to speak, before kind of, Aristotle says virtue is in the mean. So if virtue is in the mean, then we're oftentimes trying to find the balance between two extremes, which is what he started with us on this little journey today as we discuss the existence of God. So tomorrow you could say will be Existence Week, where we'll talk first about the refutation of the error that it's self-evident and therefore can't really be spoken of or argued for, doesn't need any arguments for it. And then again, after he responds to the objections today, you could say, he'll on Monday we'll read Monday Infinite. And then we'll look at the objections in the other direction that say, well, it doesn't need demonstration either because it's held by faith alone. So we're going to take a look at the other extreme in a couple days, and then we'll go from there. So, well, thank you for joining me today for Cup of Jonah, and I look forward to Monday. Now, don't forget, God bless you too, Infinite. Thank you. Don't forget that tomorrow there's the live with the podcast boys, tomorrow evening. And then also go to phoneboothpodcast.substack.com where you can see all of these episodes of Cup of Jonah. Also on Spotify. Jonah Stormrider and Cup of Jonah is the playlist for the podcast there. So, well, have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend. And ponder what you would respond to the question about God, about the existence of God being so self-evident that you can't really, there's no need for an argument for it. So just ponder that. I look forward to seeing you all Monday for Cup of Jonah.